But at this time, I'm so honored to welcome in my American accent, Amar, to the podium for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you for inviting me. So I'm going to be talking about the UK Motor Neurone Disease Research Institute. The reason I'm talking about that is it's a new way, I think, of coordinating and getting funding, and that's what I'd really like to show you. And it's also it's completely, essentially, patient-driven. So I'm going to tell you a little bit, you'll see the chaos of our political system as well during it. I'll tell you a little bit about how it came about. So the UK MND Research Institute is a virtual network of ALS research centres across the UK. And the mission is to accelerate the search for a cure. You've seen from the previous presentation very excitingly that we now know ALS definitely is something that potentially could be cured if we had the right treatment. And there are three goals that we use to try and achieve that. The first is to understand what is happening in the person who's affected, so understand the actual process of motor neurone disease, or ALS. I'm using the two terms completely interchangeably here, by the way. Then to develop potential treatments from that knowledge, and then to test those treatments in a clinical trial. So those are the three steps. So that's called the translational pathway. So it came about because in December 2019, Lee Millard, who you can see at the bottom there, and David Setters, both of whom I've known for a long time, but actually Lee I've known for something like 15, 20 years, contacted me. They're both living with motor neurone disease, and they said they wanted to see a step change in the way ALS research in the UK was funded, because they felt it wasn't really funded properly. And we had an initial discussion, and in that we went through the problems that you can see in ALS funding. Because if you're going to try and get a step change, it's important to know why you want to do what you want to do, not just what you want to do. And we thought what the problems are in funding at the moment, the funding landscape. So there's lots of them. The two main ones are that research is siloed. So when we apply for a grant, we look for what's called a grant call. So the grant-giving body will make an announcement and say, anyone interested, apply here. And then all of the different groups apply. But it's not a coordinated thing. So you might get 5 different people applying to 2 different funders for the same thing, and they won't necessarily know about it. And the second thing is the amounts of money that you get from those are very limited. A £200,000, so that's about $300,000 if we're optimistic, grant is really a big grant from our point of view, and yet it's pathetic in terms of what you can actually do with science with that amount of money, because people cost a lot of money. You want to do the research over a reasonable length of time, and most grants are really restricted in how long they'll fund you for. And the consumables cost a lot. So to do a single genome sequence used to be about $1,000. It's now about $300. So it's still quite expensive, so about €300. But it's now achievable at least. But you try doing that in 10,000 people, which is the kind of number you need to be able to get anything meaningful, minimum, that's €3 million. So how do we get all of that money? And the conclusion we came to was that we needed a BHAG, which is an actual thing. You can Google it. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. And a big, hairy, audacious goal is something like a moonshot. So it's something where everyone can understand it. It's simple to articulate. Everyone wants it because it seems like a very desirable thing, but it also seems impossible. So going to the moon is a very good example of that. It's something everyone would want to do potentially before we could go, of course. Something everyone would want to do. It seems impossible. How are you ever going to get someone to be on the moon, etc. So our BHAG was to get £50 million from the UK government at a time when we had what's called austerity. So all of our public services were being stripped back. And how are we going to do that? So that was our plan. We wanted a UK Motor Neurone Disease Research Institute, so that would be a single coordinated way of doing research and would let us get larger amounts of money over a defined period of time and act as a focal point for all research. So we had an initial planning meeting. Excuse me. You can see Sally Light from the Motor Neurone Disease Association and Brian Dickey there at the top. That was in February 2020, and we had our first formal meeting with 3 charities in total, so MND Scotland, My Name's Doddy Foundation, and the MND Association in July of that year. So this is during the COVID pandemic. This was our pandemic lockdown project. And we met we met Friday afternoons fortnightly, so that's every 2 weeks, for more than a year. We had the BBC take up our campaign and the Sunday Express, which is a newspaper in the UK that the readers generally vote for the current government of the UK. So if the Sunday Express takes up your cause, then the government will listen because it's their voters who are reading it. So that was very useful for us. And the Sunday Express said they would run a double-page spread every single week until the government caved. So it was a really dramatic thing for them to do. And we were helped because we had people with motor neuron disease who were sporting celebrities going on the BBC at a regular interval. And that was very brave of them, but also very useful for us. We met with the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, in December 2020. You can see the meeting down at the bottom there. And actually, that's Doddy Weir, who's a famous rugby player who founded the My Name's Doddy Foundation. So we had meetings with MPs, ministers, the all-party parliamentary group on motor neuron disease. These were all timed with the BBC appearances of the celebrities. So as soon as they appeared, within a day or two, we would be all campaigning and petitioning our MPs, because then they would be aware of it because it had been in the news. And eventually we had a parliamentary debate following a massive petition which was done through Twitter, and we had a ministerial round table, so that's a way for the government to decide what to do. And then Matt Hancock was caught breaking lockdown rules, having an affair with one of his parliamentary aides, so he was sacked, and we had to start again with a new Secretary of State for Health, which is Sajid Javid. So we started with him. We're meeting him there in the top left. And he actually said, there's a very high turnover of staff in our government at the moment. If I say, yes, I'll support this, it's no use. I need to actually set things in place so that even if I'm sacked, I'll still be able to support it. And so will others, they'll carry on. So he said, it'll take a little bit longer than you expect, but it will happen. And he was true to his word. We didn't realize he was going to be true to his word. So in September of that year, we put a large 40-page document into the government spending review. And that document was coordinated from the major ALS research centres across the UK. So it was a scientific document. We also had 3 other documents. One was a single-page, very simple one for the MPs. Another one was a 3-page, slightly more detailed one for the civil servants. And the other was a very slightly longer one that was more technical for people who are interested. So all of those 4 documents went into the spending review in September, and we didn't hear anything, so we thought it hadn't been funded. And then in November, Boris Johnson, who was, I think, our 3rd or 4th Prime Minister at that point, I can't remember, made an announcement that they would fund the £50 million. And so the Sunday Express was very excited about it. So we'd been to Downing Street. You can see the people living with motor neuron disease there outside Downing Street. So that was very exciting. But making an announcement and actually getting the money out of the government are 2 different things, as we learnt. So we then went to the Secretary of State for Business, Kwasi Kwarteng, in the top right there, in November 2021, and he was very annoyed that he had to have this money out of his budget, and he was saying that it wouldn't come out of his budget, it would have to come out of the Department of Health, and the Department of Health was saying, no, it's going to have to come out of this other department for business, etc. So we had that kind of problem to deal with. Eventually we managed to get 1 million pledged, which was already pledged, in fact, because it was an excess fund that they wanted to get rid of, but they rebadged it as for this, and so we said, okay, we'll go with that to start with. And you can see the planning meeting there at the bottom left with the scientists at another charity called LifeArc, which was very helpful in trying to coordinate everything between the government and then the 4 charities. So we had 2 government funders, Medical Research Council and NIHR, and the 4 charities. You can see us at the bottom right there going to Parliament for, I can't remember how, that was probably the 7th or 8th time, with 3 different MPs there. Then we had further meetings with yet another Secretary of State for Health, because Sajid Javid was sacked when the Prime Minister changed another time. So we had Steve Barclay to start with. And he was then sacked. Another one took over, Therese Coffey, and then he came back in. And before he was sacked, one of the things we were trying to get was the government to say this money would be ring-fenced for ALS research, and they refused to say that. But he was very annoyed that he was being fired. So in leaving, this is being recorded, isn't it? Forgot that. Anyway, in leaving, he said that the money would be ring-fenced for motor neuron disease research, and that was recorded in Hansard, which is our parliamentary document. He then came back as Secretary of State for Health a few months later, and so our patients were able to write to him and say, look, you said this money would be ring-fenced. And because he had said it, he had to honour that. And that made getting the money a bit easier. So in February 2023, we had another roundtable, which you can see in the top left there, where we decided how the money was going to be spent. We actually formally launched with the first million. This is our launch meeting in November 2022, and the project started in January 23. And we now have all of the money, so this is how it's broken down. I'll go through that in a moment. I just want you to see the little thing on the right, which is the quote from Hansard, from Steve Barclay. He says, the departments welcome the opportunity to support the MND scientific community of researchers as they come together through a network and linked through a virtual institute. And the reason that matters is because in the UK, it's a criminal offence to call yourself an institute unless a Secretary of State has said you are an institute. So we can use that and legitimately call ourselves an institute. So the institute split is 1 million to this thing called the United to End MND Partnership Coalition. We've got £2 million for unified data support through Dementia Platforms UK and Health Data Research UK, which are two very large government-funded bodies that can link all of our data. They can make a single data spine, so all of the institutes have one centre for the data, and they can connect that with government information. So, for example, where does someone live? What's the poverty level like there, etc.? Is there lead in the environment? All those things. 12.5 million goes through another thing that's already set up called the Dementia Research Institute. 6 million goes through a thing called the Translational Research Accelerator, which is just the outline bids closed 2 days ago. And they've had, I think, quite a lot of interest in that. And then 8 million is a very nice little program called Experts ALS, where instead of using mice as the experimental model, we use humans as the experimental model. So where there's a new drug that comes out, if it's known to be safe, we give it to about 60 to 90 people. We measure their neurofilament level at the beginning, and then about 6 to 9 months later again. And if there's a change in the neurofilament level, then we can prioritize that drug for further trials. If there's no change, it doesn't mean it doesn't work, because it may be that it takes 2 years for the neurofilaments to change. We don't know. You know, if you've got a milder treatment that's still very effective, it may not show up. But it's a way of saying, well, this one definitely has a big change, and therefore we'll prioritize it. And then there's 20.5 million, which goes through the Medical Research Council using the old system. So we have to just do little siloed grants, which aren't very good, but at least it's better than nothing, and it's much more than we would normally have available to us at the Medical Research Council. So the 3 pillars, as I said, understanding the patient, identifying potential drugs, and then testing those treatments in trials. And we had the formal launch about a month ago. You can see my co-director there, Chris McDermott, giving a talk, and all the people there. There was plenty of media as well. And Amber Collingwood, you can see there, she's our senior project manager for the Institute. So the first steps, we've got a national stem cell resource. So that means when we when we test the drug in a stem cell, normally, if you then test that in another lab, there's often differences in the cells used or the methods used. For us, it's exactly the same in each place, and that means any changes you see, you know, are due to the drug, not due to the experimental error. We've got a national system for sampling all the patients. We've got national MND registers now integrated with research, so each person gets an identifier. We've got a telemedicine research platform that's just being developed so that people can answer questionnaires, they can opt into research, they can know what's happening through an app. We've got data linkage systems, as I said, where you can link all the different studies people are in. So if someone's in a clinical trial and they also give blood in another study, we can link them with their permission. And we have the clinical trials platforms. There's 3 of them. There's Experts ALS, there's the TriCal system, which is a European system, and there's a thing called MND Smart, which is a UK-based platform. And then we've got training posts to build the next generation of researchers. And the benefits are we've now got national coordination of the MND research programs. The collaborations are larger and stronger, and you can see the funding was much more than you would normally get. It wasn't piecemeal. We've got unique programs of work that wouldn't have been possible with the old system. We're a focal point now for industry and pharma partners because they can just say, oh, look, there's the MND Research Institute, and they can contact us. And we actually have an industry liaison component of the institute. And we've got flagship collaborations. So Challenge Works, for example, is it's the thing that launched the Longitude Prize, which is a historical prize, which is why we have watches. Actually, we're in Switzerland, so it's very appropriate. But to know where you are in the longitude of the world, you have to know the exact time. And so there was a competition historically launched out of Greenwich for whoever could solve making a clock that would still work when you were at sea. And that was solved, and so people had the Longitude Prize. So it's the same prize is now saying we would like a cure for ALS. We've got the Medicines Discovery Catapult, which is a system for linking with industry, and we've got the 2 data platforms. So these are all the charities that were involved, and you can see the 2 government funders at the top there. And I'll stop. Thank you very much.